And welcome to another Mark Bishop show. You know, as we head into a new year, the one challenge facing every chief executive is how to best move forward in a post-pandemic world. The way we work has changed dramatically, and the economy, well, it's shifted radically, hasn't it? So the question is, where do we go from here? So to understand actions leaders are taking, as well as the plans that they're doing and setting in motion, YPO recently conducted a survey of some 1,681 chief executives from across 96 countries and more than 47 industries. So YPO is the world's largest global community of chief executives in the world. 33,000 members. What a database. Dan Michelson is founder and CEO of InCommon. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Most welcome. This survey of a representative sample from across their membership provides insight, I guess, into how CEOs from across the world view workplace trends. You know, the state of the global economy and the actions necessary to move forward. You know, Dan, is it being released as over 2,500 CEOs? They're gathering in New York City, apparently, for the YPO Edge Conference, one of the largest gathering of CEOs in history.
Yeah, so I'm here in New York as part of that conference, and I'm a member of YPO. I run a company, essentially a startup now, and it was running a 500-person company for the last decade. So it's a really complex and confusing time. And so the research we did was to really understand across different companies. So YPO represents organizations with 2 people up to 200,000 people. So the average company is probably around 50 to 100 people. But if you added all these businesses together, you're talking about 22 million employees. Probably it would only trail the U.S. and China in terms of GDP. So what happens here in the conversations that they're having truly matter, which is why we did this research. I mean, we're coming out of the pandemic to an extent. Next year will be our first, if you want to call it, post-pandemic year. And there's a lot of challenges and a lot of confusion. So we're trying to sort through that, and that's why we did the research.
Right. Now, your company, InCommon, you're online, right? As a website, people could study you and have a look. Let me ask you this then. What are the top 5 takeaways from the research?
Well, I'll make it even easier. I'll narrow it down to 2.
Okay.
The first is, and this is not a surprise at all, Mark. I mean, it's probably things that you and your listeners are already talking about, but it's relative to business outlook. So the kind of little twist here, if you will, is CEOs are actually more concerned about their future heading out of the pandemic than they were in the middle of it. So the level of optimism has dropped pretty significantly, and it's no surprise if you wanted to describe that in 3 words, it would be inflation, 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 right? So people are really, really challenged with how to navigate these waters. And obviously, this time of year is when you're planning for the next year. So all these conversations are really happening now. The second big headline is around company culture. So this huge shift in how work works, it's been dramatic for all of us, but it's causing a real rift between leaders and people on their team, right? So the workplace, to some extent, this is going back to January, the whole Great Resignation. I hate the term, but people know what it is. But you kind of go back to that time, and it was just a very transactional and transitional feeling with work. And to some extent, that's still there, and everyone's still trying to navigate it. And to some extent, there's essentially a crisis of confidence related to culture that CEOs are trying to navigate now. So this idea of, hey, the macroeconomic factors are really going to be challenging, and then all of this work with our team is going to make this a tough time, because of that gap is making it tough for people to kind of work through this or time or kind of thread that needle.
Well, you're right. CEO confidence regarding their outlook for their business in 2023, it's down 20% compared to last year, according to the report. What do you think you've mentioned it really, inflation, what was the key driver behind the shift? But CEOs, changes everywhere. My friends who are CEOs, they're making changes to support employees Attitudes have changed, major concerns, related to employee growth and development, finding the right people. CEOs seem to be taking a more flexible approach to where work happens. There's a lot of this remote jazz going on. I want to ask you something, because you would know this. Is there an attitude in business, because someone brought this up to me the other day, they'll never go back to offices the way they were because they're saving too much money? They don't have to pay holiday pay. They don't have to do this, do that with the remote factor. Is that in there, or do you think that's going to change?
Well, so there's my perspective, and then there's kind of what this data will tell you. So let's start with the data, right?
Okay.
So I think the research will show you that it takes 66 days to form a habit, and it's now been 967 days since we stepped into this pandemic. Right. So to the extent that people think we're going to put the genie back in the bottle, good luck. That's going to be challenging. So if you now look at the data, pre-pandemic, if you look at the hybrid setting, as it's now referred to, and then working at home, if you combine those two settings into one, about 18% of workers globally were in those settings. Now it's about 54%. So that's 3 times as much over the course of close to 1,000 days. They form new habits, and their work and their life are now very different than they were before. So regardless of how people feel about the good and the bad of that, which we can talk about, because there's some pluses, but there's a lot of minuses too. It's very hard to go backwards. And so this whole idea, like you kind of play with terminology, this whole idea of bringing people back, I think maybe the better way to think about it is how do we bring them forward and take this opportunity, this moment, as more of an opportunity to kind of re-engineer or rethink how work and life are integrated. Versus just trying to bring people back to the past. If you actually study past pandemics, going back to the bubonic plague or the Spanish flu, the exact same things happened that are happening now. You had 1 out of every 3 people die in Europe during the bubonic plague. So people tried to force them back to work. They weren't buying it. They ended up with job mobility, moving to different jobs. The average raise at that time was about 300%, not 50% or 30% or 10%, which we saw globally in certain cases, depending on the role. And that same kind of dynamic was in play during the Spanish flu. I mean, 1 out of every 50 people in the world passed away at that time. You're coming off a world war. So things swung a different way, and people tried to force things back to where they were before versus looking at this in a progressive way and saying, how do we understand the trend and lever the moment? And I think that's the big challenge for leaders right now, is to, instead of, kind of to some extent have this friction with the people that work for them, really try to embrace this and work together to create something better.
Well, the old cliche of history repeats itself, heavens above, you were spot on with that. My understanding is that, and you mentioned it earlier, that you recently left a 500-person company where you were CEO for a decade, but partly due to your desire to understand these types of issues, and how best to address them. Company culture, what CEOs are experiencing. And now, look at this challenge. The remote and hybrid settings, business leaders, you must have it's like looking through, into a crystal ball. You have all the answers perhaps at InCommon. Is that the idea?
Well, I think everybody has all the ideas. And then the question is to, there's an old saying, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. So if you were to amalgamate and pull the ideas together, then you can really, potentially help people. And so like for me, I'm a culture guy. So I helped grow a company from 50 people to 6,000 people. Then another company like you were just referring to, I was there for a decade, we grew the company from 50 to 500 people. If you ask me, my greatest joy was working with people and helping them grow. That was my DNA. And now that was gone, I was not feeling great. I was really down. And I just figured after 10 years, maybe it's time to try something new. And as I thought about what that new thing would be, I'm like, well, what's the biggest problem to solve? And this is the one that I could feel, not only me, but my friends, my family, my daughter just graduated from college, my son's in college. This is what our children are inheriting. There's a chance to really affect this and turn it into a win versus feeling like it was a loss, which is what I was experiencing. So, the research that I've been doing with YPO and independent YPO is that there's really 4 feelings that we want for ourselves, our family, our friends when it comes to work. In order for work to feel like you have pride in it, there's purpose and you have passion for it, right? And those four things are kind of what you feel like you're in the core of anything you do. And there's four things. One's a sense of community. So I feel like I belong and I'm part of something. The second one is opportunity. I feel like I have a future here. I'm working towards something.
Right,
Three is relationships. If I have strong and trusting and friendships and relationships at work, I love work. The last one is experiences. You need to have those new experiences that help you grow. So that acronym is community, opportunity, relationships, and experiences. To your question, that's what we're working on, is something called core. How do you get more people to feel like they're part of the core? That's the goal, because work has, it's very validating and it's incredibly important to all of us. And when we don't have it, which many of us don't have in different ways now, we've lost something.
Right.
And we're trying to get that thing back versus trying to create something new that's even better.
Fabulous. Very wise words and well spoken. Good advice there, Dan. Thank you. I think a lot of CEOs will take something out of this. I know I have, but, Dan Michelson is the founder and CEO of InCommon. Great to have you. People could go there. By the way, is there a web address you'd like people to go to?
Yeah, please. To look at the research we just produced, go to ypo.org, or you can go to incommon.com. Either place, you can pick up that report.
Fabulous. Well, we got to go, but thank you, mate. I really appreciate your time and interesting information. Let's look forward to 2023 in a more positive veil, huh?
There you go. I'm with you. I think it's a once in a lifetime opportunity for leaders to really lead. So I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today.
You're most welcome.
That word.
Most welcome, Dan. Lovely having you. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Michelson, founder and CEO of InCommon. All right, check it out. Good site, very interesting to read. And you heard him here on The Mark Bishop Show.